Hi there guys, welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be going over a few of the most creative ways that you can find investors in 2021. Now again, this is part 2 on the series, so if you haven't already checked out the past videos, then do be sure to check them out. I will link them in the description below. So as we know, finding investors can be very difficult, and finding a really good investor can be extremely difficult, especially in the climate of the market today. But again, you don't have to use the traditional way of finding investors, whether that's, just on social media or going to some in-person networking events. There are many different strategies that you can approach in order to obtain investment. Now, whether you're looking for investors to sell deals to or fund some of your projects, these methods can be utilized in absolutely everything in terms of investment. So without further ado, let's just jump straight into it. So tip number 1, and that is to focus on 1 to 2 things and post about it consistently. Now, as we already know, social media is an absolutely incredible marketing tool. And if you're not already on it, then you are missing out on something truly amazing. Now, what I mean by focusing on 1 to 2 things and posting about it consistently is essentially picking a strategy. So whether you're a deal sourcer and you're selling specifically flip deals or buyer February finance deals, focus on those and then post about them all the time. Or whether you're looking to raise finance for your projects, post videos of you viewing the project or the numbers of the project and just keep posting about it, so it's going to attract more of those investors. Now, you might think this is fairly simple, but again, not enough people do it. When we first started, we were just posting about absolutely anything, but now we've soon come to a realization that we need to be posting about the correct things. So just to give you a bit of an example, we tend to focus a lot on the turnkey buy-to-lets and the BRRs. Now from these 2 specific things that we're specifically doing, we need to be creating content about them. So whether that's just doing a very simple post or a carousel post on why turnkey buy-to-lets are really good, or we could even post a story about some of the figures for this turnkey buy-to-let or these BRR deals, just making it very specific to the actual thing that you're actually doing. So people know that they can come to you if they were ever looking for that. Now, say you're looking to raise finance to fund a project, like I just said before, you can obviously post videos about the figures, the actual project, what the exit strategies are, just to again attract these very specific investors. Now, one thing that you do need to get clear is when you are posting and just posting anything, kind of like we were before, we were kind of just attracting the wrong type of investors. Now, when I say the wrong type of investors, what I mean by this is just normal, maybe property investors that are kind of looking for crazy returns, maybe 25-30% ROI that in today's climate is just not really feasible. So that's tip number 1, and that is essentially to pick a very specific niche, whether that's 1 or 2 things, and really just dive down on that and just utilize social media. Whether that's on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, just be consistently posting about these things, just so when it comes to these investors actually looking for those deals, you'll be the first person that they come to. Now for tip number 2, this is to pick a very specific target audience. So again, this is very similar to the last strategy where you're just kind of niching down on a specific strategy, but this time you need to be niching down and basically picking your specific target audience. So again, who are you trying to attract? Are you trying to attract young investors, new investors, just normal investors, so not very specific in property, maybe property investors in general? Again, the list goes on, but again, you just need to pick around 2 to 3 of them just so you can really focus your attention on them. Now again, just like the last tip, our example are turnkey buy-to-lets and BRRs. So essentially the people we're targeting for the turnkey buy-to-lets are either young professionals or just normal investors. Now essentially what I mean by this is young professionals, obviously they might just want to get on the property ladder, so you might want to be targeting them, as turnkey buy-to-lets are a very low barrier to entry. So by us targeting them, they'll then come to us if they are ever looking for those deals. Now, the reason you want to be doing this is very similar to the last tip, in the fact that you don't really just want to be targeting any random investor just yet, because if you get a random investor that comes to you and wants 30-35% ROI, it's just, again, not really going to be feasible for you or the client. So again, the reason why this is the second tip is because you can't do this tip without doing the first tip. You need to be picking your specific strategy first and then going on to the second tip of picking your specific target audience. So for example, if you was to actually decide to start on tip number 2 and find your target audience first, say you've picked a young demographic, people that are just getting started in property, but then you pick your very niche strategy and you decide to go for, developments. You know, just thinking about it this way, it doesn't really work. You know, you want to be starting with the strategy you're doing. So say, for example, you want to go down the development route. That's great. Now you need to pick your target audience. So again, the likelihood of it being young professionals is very low, usually because they don't have a lot of capital to start with. So again, you want to be picking those very specific investors that are specific to your strategy. So again, that's tip number 2, very similar to tip number 1, except this time it's focusing on actually picking a very niche target audience. Who will you be targeting in order to get this investment? Now, tip number 3, and arguably one of the most powerful tips on here, and is just have calls with as many investors as possible. Now, I know kind of throughout the last tip, I just said you need to be picking a very specific target audience, but for this tip, you know, I'd really recommend just jumping on calls with any investor. Now, the reason for this is to not try and get them on board. It's more or less to try and just build up that relationship with them. So again, what I'd recommend is try going in on a mission and trying to actually attract them to invest with you. But again, try not to make it too obvious, like the main reason for that call is to just get their investment. Try and build up the relationship, touch base, and just see how things go from there. Because again, the main reasoning for this tip is not to actually try and onboard them, although that would be a positive, you know, because obviously like in tip 2, you want to be picking those very specific clients. And if you're just jumping on the phone with any random client and onboarding them, then it's not really going to work. The beauty of this tip is that by jumping on a call with anyone, you then have built up that connection, and if they're not the right client for you, they can hopefully refer someone that they know to you. So again, for example, again, this is something that's kind of happened to us. We have an investor who's kind of looking for deals right now, but they are quite difficult to find. But because we've built up that really, really good relationship with him, he's been able to put us in contact with a good friend of his who is looking for turnkey buy-to-lets, the main strategy that we're focusing on. So again, it's very powerful and something that you really shouldn't take for granted. You know, try and utilize these different methods when it comes to actually trying to obtain investors. So that's tip number 3, and that's essentially just try and have calls with as many investors as you possibly can. But obviously, when you're on the call with them, you don't always want to be onboarding the first individuals you talk to. You know, get to know them, get to know if they're right for you or they're not right for you. That then goes back to the second tip, which is obviously picking that very, very specific target audience on the investors you want to be working with. So now with these 3 tips, although they're not direct methods like they were in the last clip in terms of how to actually find investors, they're very, very good methods that you can kind of use over time in order to filter out the bad investors and hopefully get the best investors. So as we know from previous videos, it can be fairly simple to actually get an investor. But the thing is, you want to be getting a quality investor rather than just any random investor. And I can promise you, getting these really, really good investors, you can't really get them overnight. You know, it needs to be built over months of trust and building up that relationship, so when it does come a time for them to invest, they know that they can come to you. So again, that's everything for this week's video. If you did enjoy, please do leave a like and do consider subscribing if you haven't already. If you have any questions at all, then please do leave them in the comments section below. Obviously, I will be linking in the description the 2 previous videos in terms of finding investors. Again, I hope you found this video really useful, and until next Wednesday, we'll see you soon.